Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. I still remember the way the sunlight spilled through the blinds that Friday afternoon, painting thin golden lines across my desk. It had been one of those weeks, long, noisy, filled with back-to-back meetings, unanswered emails, and the familiar hum of the office printer that never seemed to stop. I was finishing the last few lines of a report when I heard his voice, calm, deep, and a little too close. "Laura," he said, leaning on the side of my cubicle, "we're having a small get-together tonight. You should come." I looked up, surprised. My boss, Richard, wasn't the kind of man who threw parties often. He was reserved, professional, the sort of person who could make a whole room go silent with just one look. So the invitation itself felt unusual. "A party?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "At your place?" He smiled slightly. "Not really a party. More like a small gathering. Just some of the team. It's been a tough quarter, thought we could all use a break." There was a warmth in his tone that softened the formality I was used to. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I just needed a change of air, but I found myself nodding. "Sure," I said. "Why not?" As the clock ticked past 6, I drove home to change. I stood in front of my closet longer than I'd like to admit, unsure of what counted as too formal or too casual for a boss's get-together. In the end, I chose something simple, a cream blouse and dark jeans. Comfortable, but neat. I checked my reflection, took a deep breath, and reminded myself that it was just a friendly evening. Nothing more. Richard's house was on the edge of town, nestled among tall oaks and quiet streets where the air smelled faintly of pine and freshly cut grass. When I pulled up, I could already hear the low hum of laughter and soft music drifting from the backyard. Inside, the atmosphere was unexpectedly warm. Fairy lights hung between the trees, casting a soft amber glow across the patio. Someone was playing the guitar, others were gathered around a small fire pit, their faces lit with that easy happiness that comes after long days and shared effort. "Glad you made it," Richard said when he saw me. He handed me a glass of sparkling water. "You look like you needed this evening." "I think we all did," I said, smiling. He chuckled. "You've been carrying a lot of the team's weight lately. Don't think I haven't noticed." There was something about hearing that acknowledgement, simple and genuine, that made my chest tighten a little. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to see me, not just for the work I did, but for the person trying so hard behind it. As the night unfolded, the tension that usually lived in my shoulders began to fade. We talked about the company, about music, about the city we both grew up in. He shared stories from his early career, the kind where nothing went right but somehow worked out in the end. At one point, I caught him watching the sky, quiet for a moment. "You ever think," he said softly, "that we spend so much time trying to get somewhere, we forget where we already are?" I looked at him, surprised by the sudden depth in his voice. "All the time," I replied. There was a pause, not awkward, but meaningful. The kind of silence that fills a space rather than empties it. Around us, laughter rippled again, someone refilled their drink, and the fire cracked gently. He glanced at me then, his eyes catching the light. "You've got that look," he said. "What look?" "The one people get when they realize they're stronger than they thought." I laughed softly, half embarrassed, half touched. "Maybe I'm just tired." "Maybe," he said with a faint smile. "Or maybe you're finally starting to see yourself the way others do." It was such a simple thing to say, but it lingered. The rest of the evening moved slowly, comfortably. I helped serve food, joined in a few jokes, even sang along when someone played an old song I hadn't heard in years. When most of the guests began leaving, I stayed behind to help tidy up. Richard tried to protest, but I ignored him. "You cooked, you hosted, the least I can do is collect a few plates," I said. He gave me a look of quiet amusement. "You don't like leaving things unfinished, do you?" "Not really," I admitted. "That's what makes you good at what you do." There it was again, that steady, grounding tone. The kind that made me feel seen, not as an employee, but as a person. We worked in silence for a bit, the night air cool against our faces. The last of the fairy lights flickered above us as I turned to leave. He said something that would stay with me long after that night. You know, Laura, sometimes the best changes in life happen quietly at the end of a long day, when you're not even looking for them. I didn't fully understand what he meant then. But I nodded, smiled, and said goodnight. Driving home, I kept thinking about that sentence. About how strange and rare it was to feel both challenged and understood by someone. The road ahead was empty, the town lights fading behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt lighter that night. Lying in bed, I replayed the laughter, the warmth, the soft rhythm of conversation. There was no grand event, no sudden revelation, just the quiet realization that life still had moments of connection waiting to be found, even in the most unexpected places, and maybe, I thought, this was just the beginning of one. The next morning, the sunlight felt different. Not in color or warmth, but in the quiet way it seemed to insist on noticing me. I caught myself pausing by the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, reflecting on last night's small yet vivid moments. Something about Richard's words lingered, the idea that change, connection, and recognition didn't have to be dramatic. They could happen softly, almost imperceptibly. Back at the office, the usual chaos had resumed. Phones rang incessantly, emails pinged, and the fluorescent lights above hummed with that cold, mechanical rhythm that always made me ache for the evening's warmth. But there was something subtle about me now. I noticed the way colleagues smiled as I passed, the little nods that went beyond mere politeness. And I caught myself smiling more easily, feeling a curious spark of confidence that I hadn't in months. Around mid-morning, Richard appeared at my desk, not with a command or a question, but with a small grin. "How was the rest of your night?" he asked. His tone was casual, but there was an underlying warmth, a genuine curiosity that made it easier to respond than I expected. "It was nice," I said. "Calm." I didn't realize how much I needed that. He nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes that's all it takes." A pause. A moment away from the grind to just breathe. I realized then how rare it was to have someone in a position of authority acknowledge the human part of work, the exhaustion, the small victories, the need for time to simply exist outside deadlines and meetings. His words weren't patronizing or formal, they were quietly affirming, and I felt a thread of connection weaving between us that hadn't existed before. The day passed in a blur of tasks and conversations, but my mind kept returning to last night. I remembered the fire pit, the soft glow of fairy lights, the low strum of guitar strings mingling with laughter. I thought about how Richard had seemed so open in that moment, sharing stories, laughing at his own missteps, and quietly noticing me in ways that felt respectful and thoughtful. By the afternoon, I noticed a subtle shift in the office. People were calmer, lighter. Perhaps they had carried the echoes of last night's casual joy with them. Or perhaps it was just me noticing differently. Either way, the day felt less like a battleground and more like a space where possibility existed, where work didn't erase the human need for connection, acknowledgement, and shared experience. Later, as the office emptied, Richard called me over. "Laura, do you have a minute?" His voice carried that same easy warmth, and I found myself walking to his office with a quiet curiosity, my heels clicking softly against the floor. Inside, he gestured for me to sit. "I wanted to thank you for last night. Not just for coming, but for helping make it a better evening. People enjoyed themselves, and a lot of that was because you were there." I felt a rush of surprise and gratitude. "I didn't do much," I said, though I knew he meant more than just physical effort. He had noticed the energy I brought, the willingness to engage, to laugh, to listen. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You did more than you think. You bring presence. You make people feel welcome without even trying. That's rare." There was a pause, the kind that stretches quietly in a room, filled with unspoken acknowledgement. I felt an unexpected warmth, not from flattery, but from being seen for something deeper, the way I approached others, the care I carried in my work and interactions. "Thank you," I said softly, finally meeting his gaze. It wasn't just polite, it was genuine, resonating from a place that often went unnoticed. He smiled, a subtle, knowing curve of lips that didn't need words. I hope you realize how much of that is already in you. You don't have to prove it. You just are. I left his office with a strange lightness, my shoulders looser, my mind quieter. The drive home was calm, the city bathed in soft evening light, and I felt a deep sense of reflection stirring inside me. It wasn't about recognition, though that mattered. It was about understanding that even in the midst of routine, even under fluorescent lights and endless tasks, moments of clarity, respect, and connection could exist. That night, I found myself thinking not only about Richard but about myself, the ways I often overlooked my own contributions, dismissed small victories, or ignored quiet moments of joy. There was a realization forming, slow but insistent, that acknowledgement, kindness, and mutual respect could exist without spectacle. They could exist quietly, between people who simply saw each other fully, and just as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of gratitude that surprised me. Not for the party itself, but for the way it had allowed me to see, to witness how life, even in its most ordinary moments, had room for understanding, warmth, and subtle growth. In those quiet hours, I realized that some of the most important connections are the ones that arrive unexpectedly, in the middle of ordinary life, reminding us that even the smallest gestures, a smile, a kind word, a shared laugh, can carry lasting meaning. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to meet life with that same openness, that same quiet courage, and perhaps, to notice the people around me just a little more fully. The next week moved differently, almost as if the rhythm of the office had shifted slightly. I noticed things I hadn't before, the way sunlight filtered across the hallway windows in the late afternoon, the quiet chuckle of a coworker answering a phone call, even the smell of the coffee brewing in the small break room. Somehow, last night's party had carried over into the workweek, leaving behind a trace of warmth I hadn't expected. Richard was more present too, in subtle ways. Not intrusive, but noticeable, an occasional nod as I passed his office, a brief comment during meetings that acknowledged my input more genuinely than usual, a small smile that lingered a second longer than strictly professional. It wasn't the kind of attention that made anyone uncomfortable, it was the kind that made you feel seen, quietly, as though someone recognized the effort behind your every move. By Thursday, I found myself invited again, not formally, not as part of a schedule, but casually, almost as if it were a thought he had while walking past my desk. "Laura," he said, voice calm but warm, "I'm going to a small art exhibit this weekend. Some colleagues from the company are going. Would you like to join?" I hesitated, surprised by the invitation. It wasn't a party, not a celebration, but a shared experience, an opportunity to step outside the predictable rhythm of work and see something different. "I'd like that," I said. Genuinely. Saturday came, and the city had that soft, almost forgiving light that made streets shimmer with possibility. We met outside a small gallery tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect, a quiet stroll, a conversation about paintings, maybe a few polite greetings. But from the first moment, the air was different. Richard greeted me with a simple, "I'm glad you came," and it carried the same warmth I remembered from the party. The gallery was intimate, with high ceilings and sunlight streaming in through tall windows. Paintings in muted tones lined the walls, abstract swirls and landscapes that seemed to invite contemplation rather than demand attention. We wandered through the rooms, discussing pieces that caught our eyes. He was curious, asking questions that revealed not only interest in the art but in my perspective. "What draws you to this?" he asked at one point, pointing to a painting that swirled in shades of blue and gold. I paused, considering. "I think it's the movement," I said. "It feels like it's telling a story without words. Like it's alive." He nodded slowly, thoughtful. "I see that too. There's something quiet but powerful about it. Kind of like you, quietly strong." I laughed softly, surprised and a little flustered. "You have a way with words, don't you?" "Only when it matters," he replied. We moved from room to room, sharing observations, thoughts, and occasional laughter. The atmosphere was unhurried, gentle, and oddly freeing. I realized that in his company, I didn't feel the usual pressure to perform or appear a certain way. I could simply be observing, thinking, responding honestly. After the exhibit, we stepped outside into the early evening air. The streets were quieter now, the hum of the city softer. We walked together toward a nearby cafe he had mentioned earlier, a small place with wooden tables and a shelf of books lining the walls. It smelled of coffee and cinnamon, and there was a subtle energy, the kind that comes from spaces meant to linger in rather than rush through. Sitting across from him, I felt a sense of ease that surprised me. Conversation flowed naturally about life, memories, shared observations, and for the first time, I felt the layers of professional formality slip away entirely. Here was a man I had always regarded as a superior, now speaking and listening in a way that was genuinely human, thoughtful, and reflective. At one point, he said quietly, "Laura, I appreciate how you see things, not just what's in front of you, but the nuances. It's rare, and it matters." His words stirred something inside me, recognition, but also a quiet validation I hadn't realized I'd been seeking. I thought of the last few weeks, the long hours, the stress, the routines that felt endless. And then, these pockets of connection, unexpected, gentle, and profoundly grounding, that reminded me there was more to life than work and obligation. As the evening drew to a close, we walked back toward the gallery, the city lights flickering like distant stars. There was a comfortable silence between us, not awkward, but thoughtful, reflective. I felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond the evening itself, gratitude for being seen, for shared understanding, for the quiet realization that human connection could exist in places I had never anticipated. When we said our goodbyes, Richard gave me a smile, one that felt both simple and layered with meaning. "Thank you for today," he said. "I think this is the start of something worthwhile." I nodded, feeling the weight and warmth of those words. "I think so too." Walking home, I reflected on the journey of the past few weeks. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden change in life's path, only the quiet, steady unfolding of trust, recognition, and understanding. I realized that sometimes, the most profound experiences are the ones that arrive gently, the ones that allow you to see yourself and others more fully, without expectation or pressure. And in that moment, I understood that life had a way of reminding us that the small, subtle gestures, an invitation, a shared smile, a thoughtful question, could carry a depth far beyond the ordinary. A few weeks after the art exhibit, something shifted in the rhythm of my life. Not dramatically, not in ways that were visible to anyone else, but in the quiet spaces between work and home, in the moments when I had a chance to reflect. I felt lighter, more centered, as if each experience with Richard had opened a small door in me that I hadn't realized was closed. It was late afternoon when he approached my desk, casually leaning against the doorway. His presence was familiar now, comforting in a way that surprised me. "Laura," he said, "I was thinking, there's a lecture on urban history tomorrow evening. Some colleagues are going, but it might be interesting to go together. Would you like to join?" I paused for a moment, considering. The last few outings had been so unexpected, so different from the usual interactions I had with a boss, that they had reshaped my understanding of connection. "I'd like that," I replied. The next day, the city felt unusually quiet, the streets alive but not overwhelming. The lecture hall was small, filled with people eager to hear a historian speak about the development of the town, the architecture, and the social shifts that had shaped the neighborhoods over decades. As we took our seats, I realized that being with Richard in these settings felt effortless. Conversation came naturally before the lecture began, light and engaging, full of curiosity and gentle humor. During the talk, I found myself drawn into the subject matter, but also into the way he experienced it. He asked questions thoughtfully, listened intently, and occasionally shared observations that revealed a deep appreciation for detail and context. I was struck by how much I enjoyed watching him engage with the world, the same world we both navigated every day but often in entirely different ways. Afterward, we stepped outside into the soft glow of street lamps and the cool evening air. "I think it's easy to forget," he said, "that places carry stories we often overlook. Every building, every corner, has its own memory." I nodded, reflecting not just on the lecture, but on the unspoken stories that had developed between us. I think people are like that too, I said. We all carry histories that shape us, and sometimes it takes someone else noticing to help us understand them better. He smiled, and for a moment, the world felt perfectly still. Exactly, he said softly. Exactly that. We walked together for a while, discussing the lecture, memories of the city, and quiet observations about life. There was no rush, no pretense, just the simple pleasure of shared presence. I realized that the weeks of small, intentional experiences, the party, the art exhibit, the quiet conversations, had allowed me to grow in subtle, unexpected ways. I felt more aware of my own voice, my own thoughts, and my ability to engage meaningfully with the world around me later. As we parted ways near the train station, he said something that would stay with me long after the night ended. Laura, I hope you know that your perspective matters. You've reminded me that leadership isn't just about decisions or direction, it's about noticing the people around you, understanding them, and giving them space to grow. His words felt like a mirror, reflecting back a side of myself that I had long overlooked. It wasn't about accolades or recognition, it was about understanding that the quiet strength and insight I carried had real value. Walking home, I felt a sense of gratitude that was profound yet unspoken. Life, I realized, was full of small, unexpected opportunities to see and be seen, to connect, and to grow. And sometimes, these moments came from the most unlikely places, in the company of people who quietly helped you recognize your own worth. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on the journey of the past few weeks. The experiences had not been dramatic or flashy. There had been no grand gestures, no sudden revelations. Yet in the steady, gentle unfolding of connection, understanding, and mutual respect, I discovered something far more lasting, a reminder of my own strength, resilience, and capacity for growth. As sleep claimed me, I felt an unexpected serenity. Life had given me a series of moments that would remain vivid in memory, moments that carried warmth, recognition, and an unspoken promise of ongoing growth. And I knew that while this chapter of my story might be quiet, it would resonate for years to come, a testament to the quiet power of connection, reflection, and the unexpected gifts of shared experience.